Hello again, everyone. I am going back to a little bit of watercolor with this video. I am going to be showing you the mixing book that I used sort of in my earlier days of working with watercolor. So this is all full of mixing charts that I made for various palettes. Some of them are pre-made palettes, which is why it might be useful to you. But it also is a way to show you how to learn how to mix with watercolor. And you'll see sort of the progression of how I mixed and sort of the style that I used when in the early days of learning how to mix watercolor. This is such a useful exercise, and I learned so much about mixing color by doing this. I have not kept this up. This is probably, I would say the last one I added was at least a year ago, probably longer ago, but I just recently found this book again and thought I would share it with you all. So yeah, so let's go ahead and get in here. So I used this little piece of paper and labeled it this way. This was just sort of a little scroll work thing that came off of a bundle of papers. And this is a Pentalic watercolor paper notebook. I will put a link down below to where you can find these. This is still, and was at the very beginning and still is, one of my favorite watercolor notebooks to work in that's not 100% cotton. I mean, still, I do prefer 100% cotton over others, but for working through things and just sort of learning, this is great paper for non-cotton paper. Okay, so here I started working with, so at the very beginning, I just had a few colors. I was working with sort of the dual primaries with Daniel Smith watercolors. So here's some studies I did. This was going through the colors and mixing them with different levels of buff titanium and neutral tint, just to see what would happen with the different colors. This is actually a great way to figure out how much variety you can get with just 6 colors. And what I mean by dual primary system, if you haven't seen my videos on this before, is that you have a warm and a cool red, a warm and a cool yellow, and a warm and a cool blue. And this is actually a set that Daniel Smith sells. I'll see if I can find a link to where you can get it. I got mine on Amazon, which tended to be cheaper at the time. I'll check your prices to make sure you're getting the best deal. But it's a great way to start. You just have a few little tubes and you can just kind of play around and see what you can do with them. So this was mixing with buff titanium and neutral tint. And then here I was mixing with burnt sienna and quinacridone gold. So this was a little bit beyond when I had learned the true basics of mixing, the 3 primaries together to make different colors. And I was trying to add some different colors, like these I would consider to be sort of neutrals to add. Quinacridone gold can either be a neutral or a yellow. You could actually use it as your warm yellow, but you can see you can get a lot of lovely variation adding these to that. And then I created a little color wheel. This is where I did actually mix the different colors together around the color wheel. I didn't end up doing that for the previous one because it's basically the same primary colors. So this is a dual primary color wheel. And then here, let's see, you can see most of the 2 pages. I'll try and keep most of it in the frame there. So this was actually the first set that I had gotten of Premade watercolors, which are supposedly made with genuine minerals. Okay, I'm gonna kind of digress a little bit and talk about the current controversy regarding the Premade colors from Daniel Smith. I'm really not going to go into too much detail. I would say if you're interested in what's going on, Google it. Really, all I'm going to say is I love these colors regardless of what's in them. They're artist grade regardless of the composition of these. And in some ways, if the controversy at its core is really that there is some question as to the amount of natural minerals that is truly in these colors, because really all they have on the labels is the mineral name. And, personally, I think that even if they don't have the amount of minerals that they, I don't even think they claim that, they just say minerals on there, but I still feel like they're worth the price given the beautiful colors that they are. And this was my attempt at mixing some of these. And this is one of the reasons why I think some people were a little bit skeptical, because you tend to get kind of muddy colors. But, you know, again, who knows? I'm not really taking sides. uh you know, that there may be validity to the fact that there's not a lot of minerals in the mineral colors. There also may be validity to the fact that, you know, there's only a small amount of filler. I don't know. But I personally believe that these colors are worth the price, just because, you know, yeah, I'm buying them because I like the color. I'm not necessarily buying them because they contain a certain amount of mineral. And to a certain extent, you know, mineral mining is not very environmentally friendly. So, you know, maybe it's a good thing that there's not as much mineral in these colors. But that's about all I'm going to say, because like I said, if you want to know more, you know, Google the Primatech controversy and you'll find much more information. But I did want to kind of introduce that issue if you hadn't heard about it. Like I said, I am not going to stop buying Daniel Smith colors because of it. I feel like there's value in it. I would say that there's probably only an issue for me if something is mislabeled as far as light fastness goes, because, you know, if I do plan to make professional work and the tube says something's light fast and it's not, then, you know, my professional work is going to end up being faded over time. But if I am going to be doing that, I'm going to light test my colors first. So there you go. That's the primer on that. So let's go ahead and go on. So here is here's the basic set mixed together here. So normally, I mean, you really, if you're mixing all of the primaries together, you're really only going to have this section. So what I did is I had a darker mix and a lighter mix of all of these different colors together in this little chart. And there's a variety, and same here. There's a variety of ways you can make your charts. That's just how I do it. So basically you have all the same colors up here as you have down here in the same order. And then here you're gonna just have the colors that you're mixing with the other colors on here. And then, you know, here's your mixed colors up here. And like I said, down here I diluted these a little bit so you can see the different tones you can get with the same color mixes. And this again was sort of the earlier days of me learning how to color mix, and I had a much lighter touch with the pigment or the paint than I do now, although I still kind of tend to err on the side of adding more water than not. So you'll see a lot of these tend to not be super, super vibrant, just because I was trying to get, you know, how I was mixing to get a mix of colors, which might be a little lighter handed, I guess you could say, than some people's. So here was I think this was part of a made set of core watercolors, but I'm not sure. But I would say if you want to know, you know, which colors there are here, I would say pause the video, zoom in, see if you can see. I'm happy to answer questions, but I probably will not list all of the individual colors on the different pages, because that would be too much information probably. So I'd say pause it, take a look, see what you think. So here again, I created a warm and cool primary color wheel. And again, I put the lighter version of the mix down here. So like this is quinacridone magenta mixed with ultramarine blue. And then here is a lighter version of that mix. So that's just essentially what that is. And then here I mixed the Koi watercolor set. This is the tubes, I'm sorry. So Koi brand is a student grade watercolor, but it was one of the things that I had actually inherited from someone else who was no longer using them. So I took them on and was using them for a period of time. I'm not really using these anymore, but you can see you can get quite a decent amount of good mixes with these. And this is actually an interesting couple of pages. So, and these aren't the exact same colors, but this is a Cotman by Winsor & Newton color chart, and this is a professional watercolor chart and by Winsor & Newton. And you can see that the color differences are kind of subtle. The basic colors are the same. We have alizarin crimson, here alizarin crimson hue, here ultramarine blue, There's a lot of the same colors, but I think they might be in a slightly different order here. But I think you'd be, that's why I recommend Cotman as a student grade if you're going to go with the student grade. If you're not going to go with the student grade, I personally prefer Daniel Smith, but Winsor & Newton is obviously decent as well. But I didn't see a huge difference in my color mixing between these two. You might, these colors are a little bit more saturated, but not enough to really warrant the difference, I would say. I do have some Winsor & Newton colors in the professional line, but I don't use them very often. Okay, and then this is the Koi Sketchbox. So this is one that people tend to get as well. These are also student grade. You can get a lot of lovely mixes, as you can see. And then I also made some little color charts with different warm and cools, and I labeled them as such in here. But this was really quite fun. So that's this is for this one, and then these are for the ones on the previous page. And you can see again, not a whole lot of difference between Cotman and the Artist Watercolor. Okay, and then this was some Gouache by Turner. So Turner is supposedly an artist's grade watercolor. So Gouache is basically a more opaque version of watercolor, and in the really high quality brands you're basically just getting more pigment, and that's what's making it more opaque, but there usually is some sort of addition like white or something like that to make them more opaque. But Turner is not my favorite brand. It's one that I tried early on, and you can buy them at Jerry's Artorama. That's the main place I've seen them, but they're okay. I mean, they're okay. And I got them very inexpensively, which is why it was kind of nice to experiment. But on the next page, I have these Holbein Artist Gouache, and I would say that this is probably the gold standard for gouache. I mean, it's quite beautiful. You can see the difference. These colors are kind of pale by comparison to these. And again, you know, it's not a direct equivalent because the colors are a little bit different, but you're also getting some really nice color separation here with the granulation that's in some of these colors, like the ultramarine deep. So you're getting a lot of pigment in gouache, in these Holbein gouache. You're of course going to pay more for this than you are for the Turner, but this is probably my favorite gouache, but I don't use gouache all that often. And I guess in theory you could water down gouache and use it like watercolor. And then these are Turner Artist Watercolor tubes. Again, not all that impressed with this brand. I mean, it's very inexpensive, so if you want to try an artist, at least it's inexpensive at Jerry's Artorama. If you want to try an inexpensive artist watercolor brand, you could try this, but for example, I got a lot of streakiness and not a lot of saturated color on the color wheel here. So this was a little Sumi E watercolor set, which is a little Japanese watercolor set. I'll see if I can find this set somewhere. I can't remember where I bought it originally, but this is just a color test of that. Again, with a lot of these, there's white added, so you're not getting that sort of crisp, clean color. This is Lucas watercolor watercolors. They come off a little bit lighter in the mix, but that just could be the color combination that we have here. These are also supposedly artist grade on the less expensive side. So clearly that's where I started out and moved up. And here we have some Schminke watercolors, but although what I find kind of interesting is this is a set palette. I can't remember which one it is. They probably don't even offer it anymore, but they do offer quite a few sort of basic sets, but this actually was not all that different than this one from Lucas. There are some colors that are obviously way more saturated, but overall I still think Schminke is better than the Lucas brand. Here I tried mixing with some neutral colors and created my color wheel, which was kind of fun. And this is all something that I can use as a reference book now. This is Rembrandt. This is the luxury pocket box. And this was really beautiful. I love Rembrandt. They tend to be really sort of in your face bright as just pure colors, but they do have their place for sure. And then this was some M-Gram, and I was basically just mixing these colors together. Let's see, we had Gamboge, Azo Yellow, Quinacridone Rose, Permanent Alizarin Crimson, Phthalo Blue, Ultramarine Blue. So this was not all of those. This is just Azo Yellow, Permanent Alizarin Crimson, Ultramarine Blue, Sap Green, and Burnt Sienna. So that's those 5 colors mixed together, and that's what you get. M-Gram is incredibly saturated in color because of the amount of honey in it. I don't recommend it for traveling just because it tends to have a hard time solidifying and drying all the way. Okay, and then these are Sennelier, and Sennelier I'm kind of on the fence about. They're not really my favorite watercolor, but you know, if I had to use them, if it's all I had with me, they would actually be perfectly fine. They have a different formula for their tubes than they have for their pans. And sometimes, again, because they have a lot of honey in them, the tubes will not fully dry. So if you're planning on using Sennelier for travel, I would recommend getting the pans. Okay, now this was a labor of love for sure. This was all of my Kuretake watercolor set, the 36 colors. So this is all 36 colors mixed together. And I was actually really impressed by the broad range of mixes that you can get. Some, you know, some are only slightly different as you go along. And how useful is this? I don't know. I think I learned more just simply from mixing the colors and learning as I went than this would be helpful as a reference. But and I did this before I had the additional 12 color set that would add up and make this the 48 color set. So this is just the 36. I don't even think I could have fit 48 on here. But it was a very interesting exercise. And like I said, I think this teaches you so much about mixing watercolor, because sometimes I would mix colors and I'd be really surprised at the outcome. I'm trying to remember what ones in particular were kind of surprising, but sometimes like mixing phthalo green with certain things would get you sort of interesting mixes that I wouldn't have expected. But yeah, I would say, you know, this is a great exercise to do for yourself. And then this was a little small travel palette that I put together that had mostly greens and yellows as sort of a supplement to my Schminke watercolor palette, which was on the previous page. So this was a set palette. This was the additions that I was sort of making. And then this was those mixed together to see what kind of different colors you could get with those two sets together. Again, this is a great exercise. This is a little pre-made palette that I purchased at one point in time from Art Toolkit. It was called the Draw Your Day palette. The selection of colors in a palette is no longer available as far as I know, but this was a really great exercise to see what colors I could mix. And this is the Jane Blundell Ultimate Mixing Palette, and this was me mixing the colors before I really knew how to mix and took her class, which you know, taught me so much more about mixing. And one of the things too that this kind of chart will not give you is because if you mix buff titanium with pyrrole crimson, you can get a broad range of mixes. It's not going to be just this color here. So it doesn't give you the full range that you can get when mixing each and every color. And what I tried to do was kind of do like 50-50 with the colors when I did this. And that's not always what you want when you're making a mix. Sometimes, you know, like a phthalo color is really, really strong. So you want to use less of a phthalo color than you do of the color that you're mixing it with. So it's very complicated, but also, you know, once you learn the basics, you can kind of get into it a little bit more and not be so intimidated. This was kind of my process of getting into not being so intimidated by mixing watercolor. And that's the last one. I have an extra page back here, but I doubt I will put anything in that. I'm really not doing this exercise anymore. When I do mix colors, I tend to try particular color mixes and just see what those two colors will mix together as is sort of a range like I was just talking about, because I think that will give me more of a sense of what I can truly get out of it. And then a lot of it is I'm working off of what I learned doing these, and now I just kind of mix on the fly. And you know, when trying to match a color, it gets a little more complicated, but sometimes I just go with the flow and let the colors mix as they will and use that. So even if it's not exactly what I'm seeing, or, you know, represented true to life for a landscape or something like that, sometimes that can give you your painting a little bit of an extra sort of unexpected fun. And I think I've talked about this before for beginners watercolor. I'll put the link down below to the my advice for beginner watercolorists. Really limit your palette at first and grow from there. Don't start with the Kuretake 36 color set. Start with, you know, the 6 color Daniel Smith set, and go from there. That way you can learn, and then once you've learned the basics, you can expand. All right, well, that's all I had for you today. I hope you found that helpful and or interesting. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. Feel free to subscribe to keep track of future videos on my channel. I hope to see you next time, but in the meantime, have a great day. Thanks so much. Bye.